everybody. I'm Nikki Silvestri,
Hey, hey there. It's Lakita Williams.
and this is our diversity and inclusion tea and talk Q&A to make
Mm,
sure that we can do all of the goodies related to how diversity and inclusion and company culture come together. Our topic for today that we're going to be talking about is emotional intelligence and how that relates to both company culture and diversity and inclusion. And then, of course, the Q&A portion, you can ask whatever questions you like. They don't have to be connected to
yeah,
emotional intelligence. And if you stay till the end, you'll actually hear about a cool way that you can work with Lakita and I if you want to implement some of these things in your own business or organization. So before we get into
perfect.
all of the goodies, this is a tea and talk. So I wanted us to talk about our tea today. My tea is in my beautiful Contigo mug, and my story with this is that I really liked these mugs before I had a toddler, but now that I have a toddler, I love these mugs
It's a
even more.
necessity.
It's a
Yeah,
necessity because he grabs it, he throws it across the room, he can roll it, he can do whatever he wants to, and my hot tea isn't going to go anywhere. And I'm drinking some chai with coconut milk this morning so I can have a little pep in my step for y'all today.
I love it. Your teas are always so fancy. I feel like so. I am using my beautiful mug here, which I picked up in New York City when my husband and I had a trip together. It was such a good trip. And so this is
Beautiful.
one of my favorite nostalgic mugs of that trip. And I am drinking Earl Grey, which I think I was also drinking last week. I might have been drinking black. So I'm pretty like just continue with the same thing each
That's good.
week.
Whatever
So
works,
that's
girl.
what I'm drinking. So that's what I'm drinking today.
Beautiful. So, Lakita, why don't you tell us a little bit about company culture and emotional intelligence and how those two things fit together?
Yes, yes, yes. I love it. So just rub my hands together here because they are so interconnected. And I think I wanted to kick it off by talking a little bit about just company culture and kind of our shared definition of company culture. So it's about the practices, beliefs, values, basically our approach to how we do the work. So that's traditionally what I think of company culture. And when you think about it, every company has a culture. It can be a culture that's productive, healthy. It can be a culture that's unhealthy. So company culture is not automatically like synonymous with a good culture. And then when you think about this idea of emotional intelligence, it's many different ways to define it. But Harvard talks a little bit about like four areas. So one is self-awareness, the other is self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. So it's these four areas, and I'll tell you a couple kind of subtopics underneath those to think about. But why does the intersection of culture and emotional intelligence matter? Well, in order to move culture forward in a positive way or to create shared agreements, which I believe is really critical to company culture, and follow those shared agreements, you have to have emotional intelligence to do that. So think about how you might be moving things forward in your company. And are we able to effectively make decisions? Are we able to take risks? Do we have conflict in a healthy way? Because you actually need to, maybe I wouldn't call it conflict, but you actually need to have conversations,
I like
and
all the
some people may
conflict.
disagree. Yeah. And some people may disagree, but you still need to come to not agreement, but an agreement to move forward. And so that's something that's really different. Like you probably would want to have a standard around like how do we make decisions and how do we not block ideas? Like how do we enable ideas? And that is really critical. You have to have emotional intelligence to do it, right? If you felt really passionately that an idea was a good or bad one, then you could see how you could leave that conversation and potentially either block the work in one way or another. So your ability to regulate yourself and stand by the agreements that you made in a company is huge and a big part of company culture. So Some other things that people think about with emotional intelligence, we've heard a lot recently. I think about like having a positive outlook. So people who are more likely to be optimistic, your ability to deal with change. Oh, I lost a headphone here. As well as empathy. And Nikki, you will probably talk some about empathy, because I know that that is huge when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not from this perspective of like, we need someone to feel sorry for someone else. It's more about like your ability to see another perspective that is not your own, the ability to influence as well. And finally, one thing that's hugely overlooked, which I hinted on, is you have to be able to have difficult conversations and hold people accountable. And that is critical to DEI work as well as culture, because you can't have an effective culture if people aren't held accountable for not meeting the agreements, let's say, that we all talked about and decided that we would do and interact with together. So, Nikki, one thing that's pretty traditional that we do on these calls is to give some tips. So I'm just going to drop 3 tips really quickly before you jump into internal conflict. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Let's do it. So 3 tips around emotional intelligence when you're thinking about your company culture and how you approach the work. 1, think about just like this idea of a fight or flight response. When you send email or tasks over the weekend or after hours, a lot of times you trigger people's panic response. So because that is free time for you, does not mean that you need to send out an email at 1 a.m. And you probably don't have an expectation that people will respond, but it does send off a panic response. So for my founders, leaders, managers out there, like, try to move forward this idea or rule, like, hey, let's not send stuff after hours. Just have people back it up or like hold it in a little folder when they can send during regular working hours. That one is huge. You would not believe how much stress people have over the weekend from getting email from their boss. I hear about it time and time again. The other is seek to understand others versus seeking to be understood. So with your colleagues, with people you work with, partner with, how does this person work? What's important to them? What are their strengths? The closer your proximity is to people and the better you understand them, the more you're going to be able to work together effectively. And to want to do that is something that's very much a part of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
The last one is, when an issue or concern arises, assume positive intent. So this means engage in a conversation, talk to the person before you make an assumption about what their intention was. And I feel like so many of these go along with also this idea that Nikki is about to talk about with internal conflict and how we have conflict in a way that's healthy, but also move things forward. So Nikki, I would love to hear more about emotional intelligence when it comes to the work for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I love it. I feel like where I would need to start is something, I can't remember if I said this on the last Tea and Talk, but I certainly said it to you when we started working together, about how the way to have an inclusive company culture is to have strong company culture. So if you're looking at diversity is an issue of attracting the right people so that you have a diverse team, but then having an inclusive company culture is the thing that makes diversity and inclusion come together. And then that creates equity amongst your team if you have all of that working together. So I love how much of what you said is stuff that I end up doing in my work all the time anyway, because you have a diverse crew at the table. Having an emotionally intelligent company culture is how you get them to stay. And it's how everyone actually has a chance to fully participate in a way that feels equitable for all parties. So I just wanted to name that. And before I get into talking about internal conflict, I think I just want to name that when it comes to emotional intelligence and diversity and inclusion, what we have to look at is the way that the diversity and inclusion industry started. There's a bit of this split that I've witnessed because the phrase diversity and inclusion and the way that a lot of people think about it is from the original big Fortune 500 companies that were responding to lawsuits around discrimination. And so then as
I think that's so powerful.
Discrimination lawsuits, they created diversity and inclusion initiatives. So there's a whole part of the sector that's still steeped in, we don't want to get sued, so we have to do this. And then there's a whole other part of the sector, which I'm hoping is more people now than less, where we proactively want to create a good and better world. So let's make sure that we are diverse and inclusive from jump. And those are two really different orientations. And I think it would be worth it, depending on the type of company you are, is just checking in with that initial seed of where your diversity and inclusion work begins. Part of emotional intelligence, when it comes to what Lakita said with positive intent, is there really positive, proactive intent in the beginning and at the seed of your diversity and inclusion work? If the seed is we don't want to get sued, that's not necessarily proactive. That's a reactive. Yeah. We're trying to prevent breakage, so we're going to put things in place to try to put our fingers in the dam. But that's not creating something healthy. There's a really subtle difference. So that's step one when it comes to emotional intelligence, diversity, and inclusion. Figure out where you're starting. And so that would be with a bigger company, right? But if you're a smaller company or you're a company that's mid-sized, the seed and where you're starting when it comes to emotional intelligence is, are you actually responding to a crisis? And that's why you're putting in diversity and inclusion work. Now, crisis can be a really good way to galvanize things that you should have been doing anyway, right? Let's just be clear. Crisis spurs people to action. But there's a way that you can respond to crisis in a, we need to get back to the real work. So let's put some diversity and inclusion structures in place to handle this issue so that we can get back to the real work. That's one way. Another way of doing it is saying, I understand that this crisis came up because we don't have diversity and inclusion built into the fabric and the DNA of our institution. We need to do a hard reset to ensure that the root issue and the root cause of whatever caused this diversity and inclusion issue is solved. That's a little bit harder. It requires a level of self-reflection when it comes to going through the vision, mission, values, agreements, how those flow into the way the decisions are made, how those flow into the way meetings are run, how those flow into the way that quarterly priorities are set, how that works when it comes to the way that people hold profit. There's so many ways that resetting your internal DNA around diversity and inclusion requires a deep analysis of company culture, and just adding on diversity and inclusion initiatives without changing your DNA is a response to crisis that doesn't have that deeper layer of emotional intelligence built in. So I just wanted to start with that because I feel like it's really key. I'm actually going to go into the internal conflict as my real world example of something that I'm working on right now. But before I do that, Lakita, I want to just toss it back to you and see if there's any real world stories or examples you want to share when it comes to what you said about company culture and emotional intelligence. Past client work you're dealing with now?
Yeah, for sure. I would just say that it happens at every level. So if you, within organizations that I work with, when we think of things like, even I usually typically work with growing organizations. So in the startup space, like you're new, you're growing, you're hiring on new people. And it's time to bring kind of some sort of structure to how we think about people, like promotion or how they move across the company. And if you are not thinking about this from this entire lens of what type of organization do we want to be and how are we a more equitable organization when we think about who moves where and avoiding decisions being made from a political perspective versus like what's the right steps to take and how do we identify the right person that would fit into this role. So getting really clear on what the roles are and then identifying like where do people fit into the right role within an organization. And all of that takes very intentional and specific planning, but it takes also this idea of emotional intelligence and a willingness to be able to push back against the way things have traditionally been done. Maybe not even in your organization because it's a startup, but from another organization that you've been with where things may have been inequitable or people were just placed in a certain role, or that's just the way that things were done. So it's like what you were talking about a few seconds ago, Nikki, which is like a step-by-step planning and identification of how are we going to make agreements on working together? How do we make decisions? And how do we move ideas forward is huge.
I hear that.
Yeah.
Mm. And that actually makes me think about one of the questions that came up that was submitted before the Q&A is how do you deal with power differentials inside of an organization? And how does that relate to emotional intelligence? And what I would say is really understanding your own defaults when it comes to power and what power settings you have trouble with will help you be able to navigate in an emotionally intelligent way. So as an example, right? There's one of the tools that I work with my clients is 360 degrees of empowerment, courtesy of 10th Dot Transformations, holla, which I will link down in the comments. That's excellent tools. But 360 degrees of empowerment says that we have 3 phases of power, right? There's power up, power with, and power under, or power over, power with, power under, up, equal, down. There's a number of different ways to talk about it. And that those 3 phases of power are not exclusive to this model. Those 3 phases of power are understood in a lot of different places. But the way to use this tool is that we each have default settings that we feel more comfortable with than others. So I'm much more comfortable with power equal and power under. Those are my default settings. Taking power over is something that I struggle to do in a really healthy way without getting attached. So a question to ask yourself is, where do you usually go in a situation when it comes to power over, power with, power under? Where do you feel like you struggle to go? And then where do you find yourself having attachment when it comes to power that's not appropriate for a situation? Being 360 degrees empowered is understanding that in any circumstance, you could be in any one of those 3 states, no matter what your positional power is in the institution. If you're the CEO, it's going to be real important for you to have power under in different circumstances. I just had one of my favorite employee experiences is when I was an executive aide, like not even an assistant, an executive aide at this big company. And I thought that I needed to do everything the CEO said all the time. And I never felt comfortable contradicting her or giving her additional information. And so it got her into a situation where she was unprepared for something because I had information that she didn't have. And she just assumed, well, I don't man the front desk. I don't answer all the phone calls. I don't know what the standard operating procedure is when it comes to how to register A, B, and C. She expected me to say, when she had a suggestion for how I needed to do my job, actually that doesn't make sense because in real life, this is how it looked. And because I didn't do that, I ended up implementing a crazy system because she told me to. And when she
try to work around it.
Yeah. And when she saw that it was a crazy system, she said, well, why did you do that? And I said, because you told me. She said, but I don't know as much about this as you do. You should have responded and said, this doesn't make sense. And one of the reasons I'm using that as an example.
Such a fantastic example. Yeah.
And one of the reasons that this is an emotional intelligence example is because she was emotionally intelligent enough to know she didn't need to be in power over all the time. And it was an incredible teacher for me, So that's one example.
I love it.
Another example. But
I would love to add to that. I actually love that. And it made me, as we started to talk about this topic, write down the word influence, right? And that regardless of where you are in the organization, and the ability and a skill around influence, and a willingness to kind of hold the line or bring an issue is so critical, and it's a part of emotional intelligence. And what I would add to that conversation for leaders of organizations is to do a check-in, like make no assumptions. So if you have to be overly explicit that the people who report to you, who lead other teams, need to feel comfortable coming to you with things like something's on fire, there's an issue, there's a challenge, better ideas, it is your role to make that crystal clear. This is one of the biggest challenges and mistakes that I see in organizations. Things are falling apart, especially the larger the organization is. In the middle, they're falling apart, in one area of the business or or unit, and no one, it's really the leader of that team organization is really insulated from the problem. And absolutely, we want employees to feel empowered and have emotional intelligence to come to you, but as your role as founder, leader, CEO, it is your explicit requirement that you make sure that everyone knows not to insulate you and to bring you in and have conversations, or to push it back if something isn't working or it might not be the right idea. Huge, huge, huge. So I'm so glad that you brought that example, because it goes both ways, the emotional intelligence. And just this idea for leaders of foresight and forethought of how people might respond, and recognizing how power dynamics come into it.
Yeah, 100%. And then the other question.
Well, Nikki was just executing.
Executing. The other question that I got ahead of time for us to review was, how do you deal with an internal conflict? Do you have a step-by-step or a roadmap if I'm an employee and I'm dealing with internal conflict in my organization? And I really had to go deep with this one, because having a step-by-step roadmap is something I do with my clients. And I wanted to make sure that it was easily understandable. So I wanted to go into a really specific example that I'm dealing with right now in my business. So
love it. Rock it.
Bringing it right now.
Yeah.
So I am doing some event planning right now, and we are down to the wire when it comes to this particular event. I'm working with a partner, and I'm feeling some conflict when it comes to not wanting to do things last minute and rush. And I could be in my feelings about that and go to this partner all crazy and be like, why did you not get me this on time? Now we have to change the whole goals of the event. Well, I ain't going to be working fast, so you're going to have to do right? That's what you just saw is how I feel on the inside. Now, on the outside, the part of me that does emotional intelligence and company culture and diversity and inclusion work, the step-by-step process that I'm going to do is, first step, understand that it's not wrong. Conflict. And this is something I feel like so many people skip. I've seen them skip it. It is not something to be skipped. A part of your values internally in your company has to be, conflict is not wrong. Conflict is evidence of growth. It is the precursor to breakthrough. Different people, and if you have deep emotional intelligence and security, the more you're able to register conflict as a growth opportunity instead of a threat. Right? Conflict is an opportunity for you to expand your worldview. So me, in this particular situation, I could feel threatened by the fact that my time is potentially threatened by planning last minute, by the fact that the goals of this event are changing, by potential reputation damage, all the things, right? But if I settle into, this is an incredible opportunity, what is it an opportunity for me to do? It's an opportunity to work with someone who's really brilliant that collaborated with this event. And it's an opportunity for me to grow when it comes to how I articulate and how I make decisions when something doesn't go according to plan. Because that's life. Life does not go according to plan. So step 2, personal responsibility. It is my personal responsibility to create a good outcome in this situation. It's not her fault. It's not the universe's fault. It is not up to me to externalize the responsibility or the blame for this conflict. It's up to me to say, awesome, I signed up to do this thing that I really care about. It's my responsibility to have a good outcome. So that leads to step 3. What are we creating? Reset around best intentions. If it's my responsibility to create a good outcome, what are we creating? We're creating an incredible event that's going to serve people that we both care about. So, and I know that she really wants to create the best event that she can. I know that I really want to create the best event that I can. And then step 4 is to work it and reset around the best intentions all the time. Whenever I feel like I get in my feelings, whatever outcome or plan that I'm taking on in my personal responsibility, if I don't see it go according to plan, or if I feel like I'm bumping up against the wall, in conversation right then, I say to her, I know that you want to create a good event. I know that I want to create a good event. It seems like we're struggling with this thing when it comes to the guests. What if we did X? And that's like kind of a bonus step is, are your questions proactive and curious? Or are your questions decelerating? So
yeah, I love that.
Ask proactive and curious questions that lead you somewhere and lead you to forward momentum. But you can feel when you're asking questions that don't lead you anywhere, that stop, that create an either or situation, or that just name a problem and don't actually create an inquiry or a solution to solve it. I'll pause there.
Love it. No, I was just thinking, so like an example of the question like that you were just talking about would be something along the lines of, we're going to miss this deadline, right? It's not seeking to understand. It's not seeking to figure out a way forward. And the 2 things that I love that you mentioned there that take me back to what I spoke about around like culture and emotional intelligence earlier in the call was this idea of proximity. So come closer to really understand that person's way of working, and what do we agree on and have in alignment. And secondly, I would just add, like, what agreements can we make and hold each other accountable to the agreements that we make as well. So this is such a great example, and this rooting together around we want the same things.
Yes.
We are both human beings. We both want good things. And that adds a bit of this optimistic like worldview into it as well. Which is like, we are trying to make this company successful. How do we get together around like what we agree on, and then try things when you add in this idea of innovation, is that innovation at some point, yes, you will need to say, we're no longer going to pursue this idea, but when ideas are really early, right, you have to start them and move things forward. So, and not be hindering. So I love this. I love this example.
Yeah.
I think we're,
and I wanted to just do a recap real quick and then connect it to diversity and inclusion. So the recap of those steps were how to deal with internal conflict in real time. Establish in your company culture, conflict is not wrong. It's a growth opportunity. Step 1. Step 2, it's your personal responsibility to create a good outcome. Don't externalize responsibility for this or expect the other person to do stuff before you do. Step 3, reset around your best intentions and whatever you're trying to create versus the problem. Step 4, do the work. Experiment with trying to solve the problem and continually reset around the best intention. And when I connect that to diversity and inclusion, diversity means there will be conflict, just straight out the gate, because there's cultural differences in the way people work. There's really different assumptions when it comes to worldview. There's different biases that we each carry. And these different perspectives, when it comes to creating a diverse team, is what creates really good outcomes. If you're able to cohese those different perspectives into efficient and effective plans. So with this 4 step-by-step process, me taking personal responsibility, if I'm the only Black person, if I'm the only woman in a situation, before I say this outside group needs to change so that I feel more comfortable, I can take personal responsibility and say, this is the thing that I would like to create. Who should I talk to to be able to create my own sense of safety and comfort in this situation. And it's once I try over and over again to take care of myself and I'm hitting walls, and I'm trying over and over again, that's when I maybe seek some other options when it comes to potentially leaving the space. But I feel like it's a subtle nuance around my responsibility in diversity and inclusion. If you just remember that phrase, my responsibility, and everybody remembers that as a first step, that creates a lot of generous space to be able to co-create together.
Mm.
And we're right against our 30 minutes.
Yeah, the time.
I'm curious, Lakita, if you have any last comments.
Yeah, I don't think I do. I think I will add the bonus step to what you outlined, is coming up with like what are the rules, systems, processes that we agree together to follow, and then holding each other accountable to those is critical, I think, for because we have such different worldviews, we're going to see things differently. So how do we get to agreement about what we're going to do with intention on how we work together? And that is when people think about this idea of company culture, that's usually what they may think about, something like, what school did you go to, or what company that you worked for previously before coming to our organization. But what you're really trying to get to with company culture is like, what is our shared values, and how do we want to pursue our work together, and do we have shared purpose and coming in alignment with those? And that takes emotional intelligence around, do we need to reset? Are we off track here? And just constantly keeping thoughts going about that. I feel like I could talk about this forever, so I'll stop right there.
Well, and if you want to keep talking to us about that, that is the wrap up part, is that Lakita and I, we're doing these tea and talks because we've just started a partnership together. I've done diversity and inclusion work with businesses and companies and organizations.
And I have done company culture.
So we are joining forces and becoming Voltron and offering holistic company culture, diversity and inclusion services for organizations and businesses that want to have soulful, high performance team. And that's really our specialty, is that combo of soul and high performance, because we are in an era where we need both of those things if we're going to create.
Very true.
So if you're interested,
I'll just add one thing, Nikki, because I do think that one thing we do that is different is we are focusing on an empowerment model. So it's not just a sage from the stage. Like, we're going to come and work alongside you to help with your teams as you guys create these agreements and strategies together. And then our focus is on coaching you on executing, so that then you and your company and the people you support know how to do this work themselves, and we don't have to just come in and save the day.
Awesome.
So I think that's critical.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining our tea and talk. It looks like my son wants to join. He wants to say hi, everybody. I'm on Facebook Live.
I know.
Thank you so much for joining us. You can catch go to NikkiSilvestri.com. You can sign up and you can catch the replay there, along with a little bit of explanation about what we talked about, or you can watch it here on Facebook Live. Really appreciate y'all joining us. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.